conservator that the foreclosure action before it involves an incapacitated adult, or if it stops the court from issuing a bench warrant on someone for failing to appear, as has happened to one of my clients who was in a coma on their criminal court date. It impresses upon the court its duty to inform the persons whose rights as an adult have been limited that they have the right to seek modification and termination in the future if circumstances change. And once the ward is back in front of the court, it expands their ability to be heard, not just by a judge, but by a jury if they want. And it expands their ability and the court's ability on what changes can be made. Specifically, it grants authority to the district court to make broad changes, including establishing visitation arrangements between the ward and any person. And this bill gives both gives authority and creates an obligation on the cabinet, who is many times appointed as guardian over an individual as a last resort, to encourage the ward's connection to their family members when appropriate, to provide the ward's family members with information on how they can be considered for appointment, and most importantly, to provide family members with guidance, including but not limited to a case plan for what the family members need to do in order to be considered for visitation or placement of the ward. This bill gives wards and those who love them something that they need in these situations. It gives them hope. Thank you. So that concludes Ms. Shepard's remarks. I would like to introduce Dr. Sheila Schuster now, who will talk about the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition's position on the bill. And then afterwards, we'll introduce you to the person who will carry the bill in 2023 regular session, Representative-elect Lindsey Burke.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Sheila Schuster, a licensed psychologist and executive director of the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition. Thanks to Chairman Westerfield and to the committee members for allowing me to speak this morning. The Mental Health Coalition came together in 1982 to speak with one voice on issues impacting Kentuckians with mental illness, substance use disorders, developmental and intellectual disabilities, and acquired brain injuries. The 80-plus coalition members include providers, agencies, and hospitals, Kentuckians with lived experience, their family members, and advocates. You also know me as the co-chair of the 874K Disabilities Coalition. And while that group does not take policy stands, I want to tell you that working with that group as well as with the Mental Health Coalition, I so value giving a voice to those with lived experience. And that's really what this bill does. This really brings the person who is disabled or partially disabled to the table and gives them a voice in the way that their life is conducted. I was able to work with Representative Patty Minter a year ago on language in House Bill 118, and the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition supported it, as we saw it as providing greater protections and clarifications for individuals with disabilities for whom a guardian or conservator had been appointed. That legislation, and now BR 37, build on the excellent reforms around conservatorship done in 2018 to clarify and protect the rights of those who need help and oversight in managing their affairs. We are in support of BR 37 being presented today. Among the additional notifications and communications with the individual that are contained in this bill include the requirement that more information be gathered and available regarding near and extended family members who may play a role with the individual. It assures that the individual is apprised of any pending civil or criminal actions that are filed against him or her, and requires notification by the conservator or guardian that these notifications be made. It affirms the individual's right to contact and retain legal counsel. Importantly, it gives the individual the right to modify or terminate their current guardian or conservator arrangement and provides for court-appointed counsel if needed in such cases. BR 37 continues the longstanding requirement, which we wholeheartedly support, for a jury trial for the determination of a disability unless ruled unnecessary for very specific reasons. It provides protection for the individual from unwanted contact by providing for a visitation schedule if needed. In short, BR 37 is successful in walking a very narrow line between expanding protections of and broadening self-determination by the individual with a disability. The Mental Health Coalition applauds this effort and asks for your support of BR 37 when it is taken up in the 2023 General Assembly session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Schuster.
Representative-elect Burke.
Thank you, Representative Minter. Thank you, Senator Westerfield. And thank you to all the distinguished members of the Joint Committee. My name is Lindsay Burke. I am the representative-elect for House District 75, and I look forward to joining you in January. It's my privilege today to come to you on behalf of this bill. The CARE Act is an important piece of legislation because it's taking good law and making it great law. It's been one of the great privileges of my legal career to represent people in need of guardianship. I've served as a guardian ad litem in Fayette District Court for several years, and I've seen the way that the improvements on the law have benefited wards, and I see that there is room still for benefit to these vulnerable individuals. What is so special about this legislation is its simplicity. It's not a major change, and yet these small changes will have significant impacts on the vulnerable citizens of Kentucky who have guardians and conservators. By making these small but important changes, we can ensure that people of all ability levels are able to speak their minds through counsel, whether appointed or hired, and that protections will be available for them if they find that they're in a position of exploitation. It will be my incredible honor to carry this forward into the next session. I welcome you to come to me with any questions or suggestions, and I sincerely look forward to working with you in the coming years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative-elect. Good to meet you. Glad to have you here with us this morning. Representative Minter, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Schuster. I don't have any questions from the panel, so thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It has been my honor to present this bill twice, and I look forward to coming to the hearing when this is hopefully heard in House Judiciary in the next session.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Schuster. Always a pleasure to see you. No, you need never apologize. You're all good. And I'm going to have Secretary Friedlander and the folks from CHFS come up for item number 3 on the agenda. But while we're doing that, before we get into these last 2 items, I want to take a moment and recognize, because I expect the meeting might run a bit long, and in case we lose folks, I wanted to do this now. But I wanted to recognize our outgoing members of the committee. We've got several that are leaving the committee who are retiring from service or leaving the office, and I wanted to recognize those folks. Representative Cantrell, Representative Fisher, Representative McCoy, Representative Minter, Representative Scott, and of course Chairman Ed Massey, who gives his apologies. He is stuck in Boone County in court and cannot get here in time for the hearing, and I hate that for our chairman. And then of course my good friends in the Senate, Senator Alice Forgy Kerr, who I will miss more in the Senate chamber as my seatmate across the aisle there than in here. Though I'll miss you in here too. We need some more Alice's in here. That's 100%. And then of course my very good friend and colleague and former vice chair, Senator Will Schroeder. Your service to this committee has been important, all of you. All of you have been critical. You have provided insight, expertise, patience, and your talent and skill, and your families have served with you, and you have brought honor to the institution that you served, and I'm thankful for each of you, and I'm going to miss you. Thank you all very much. With that said, I want to go ahead and jump right in to some agenda items that are not nearly as fun to talk about, but are still important, and we need to spend time on them. So I want to thank you, Secretary, for coming in. I brought you all in because of what happened to the Brooklawn facility, where a 7-year-old was killed, died, because of things that went on. And I know some steps have been taken there at that facility. But I wanted to hear from you. I want to know what's happening at Brooklawn, what's happening at other facilities like it. I want to know what's being done to prevent it from happening again. And I wanted to give you a chance to tell us what the heck happened and answer those questions and answer the questions of the panel. Like a 7-year-old shouldn't be dying under any circumstance, and certainly not in state's custody. Mr. Secretary, you have the floor.
Eric Friedlander, Secretary of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Marta,
Marta Miranda-Straub, Commissioner for this.
you have to.
Sorry. Commissioner Marta Miranda-Straub for DCBS.
Lisa Dennis, Deputy Commissioner for DCBS.
The presentation on the previous bill is the second most difficult thing we do, which is guardianship. The most difficult thing we do in the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the most critical for citizens of the Kentucky and children, are our investigations and protection of our most vulnerable citizens, and that's the children who are subject or at risk of abuse and neglect. I'm going to start with a broad overview. We're still working through some things with Brooklawn and specific facilities, so if you don't mind, I'll be a little more general, but I think it will shed light on specifics. So, too often, when there is a child fatality, oftentimes DCBS has been involved at some point, either with the family, with the child, and at that point we make the best recommendation we can. When we recommend a child is removed from their parents' custody, that is probably the most difficult recommendation we make. We are saying to that child, we will do better. We will do better for you than the situation that we find you in. Too often, and certainly in the case you referenced, we fail in that mission. There's no other way to say that. And it is not any one administration. As you all know, I've been around since 1985. I've worked with DCBS, in and around DCBS since that time. It is the most challenging thing we do. When I was working on the homelessness piece and homeless services in Louisville, oftentimes those young adults that were on the street had come through our systems. So there's a lot we need to do to improve. The first thing I hope we did to improve is I think I brought somebody in to the commissioner's office that was not like any other commissioner in the history of DCBS. Comes with its own challenges, but changes in culture are important and take time and dedication. Support for social workers in the field when we're seeing, like many other places, healthcare, education, this continuous drop in the number of folks who are willing to serve in these very, very difficult jobs. These are folks who had someone address domestic violence. These are folks that are going into homes where domestic violence is often alleged as a part of what is going on, and going in as a social worker, oftentimes by themselves. And again, rarely are negative outcomes because they have pretty significant training, but tremendous challenges that these social workers face. The facilities, these children that come into their services, and we're seeing this more and more, have severe and acute behavioral health issues often. There are some challenging behaviors there. What also happens is occasionally staff and culture are not up to the challenge of the children that they're serving. We see this, and the culture of a facility can change quickly. A 7-year-old or any child should never die in the custody of the cabinet. Never. It is a tragedy. And we've seen too many. We've seen a couple in facilities. So we've made some changes. I'll let the folks who are here with me speak more specifically. But one change that we made is the same region where referrals are made into facilities, we need more objective eyes as we look back, right? We need to have more objective eyes. So we're making some changes there.
What would that change, Mr. Secretary? Would that change where the children go or whether they go at all?
This change would be how we look at the facility and investigate any allegations there.
Okay.
The change on, and again, I will let them get to this, but the change we want to make, we were one of the first states, previous administration, that started the Family First prevention piece around how we do this work with children, right? We were one of the first states to do that. But what that meant is that we had to take time, and it is taking time, to elevate the prevention. So children and families, and this is what we see, come to our attention, or sometimes early, when a real difference could be made if we were able to provide prevention services and wraparound services to families. We're starting a pilot with some family resource centers and I think a community action agency where when we get those early referrals, we'll refer out for services. We're going to see how that works. We need to try things differently to try to get upstream. So the other piece I think that is probably the most difficult for us when we investigate is not only those facilities, and I don't know how to, this is more of a request for a national change, I suppose. Those children and families that go across state lines, and there have been several of these in the past couple of years, where there is potential that DCBS was involved with a family. But because that child is in and out of state, it has been a challenge to have eyes on that child and family if folks go across state lines. State rules are different. How we define abuse and neglect is different. We just passed Senate Bill 8, sponsored by Senator Julie Rocky Adams, to look at our definition of what abuse and neglect is, because it shouldn't just be related to poverty, but every state defines it differently. So coming together on joint investigations is one of the more difficult things that we can do. And we have not been able to get there. We've got a couple of border states that are county-based. We're working with Hamilton County in Ohio to try to come up with some ways to figure out how we can do things across systems. The changes that we've made, we've increased social worker salary. We talk about secondary trauma. The reason I came back to the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, one of the reasons, I love my work in Louisville, was that we had not addressed that in our workers, so that the trauma that you see that I described walking into dangerous homes, right, and coming back out, so they don't get jaded.
I appreciate that, and I fully support more funding for your social workers too.
Yeah.
And I think everybody in this committee would do that in both chambers. I don't. That's not the problem. This little 7-year-old boy wasn't in the arms of social workers, I don't think. Can you respond to the allegations that are in this news story about this child who was put in a chokehold of some kind, died of positional asphyxia, said the news story, vomited during the encounter? What level of investigation was done here? Because according to the news stories that we've seen, this is not an isolated case. And as we're going to get to the other cabinet next, there are other issues in other agencies within Kentucky state government. I want to know about what investigations were done here and whether or not anyone raised this issue, whether or not someone knew, if there was a training deficit, if there was a workforce issue. I don't know what led to this. Maybe the individuals that did this, I don't know. I can't explain or justify the behavior that led to this. But I'd like to know what's happening there, because this wasn't at the hands of social workers, who, you're right, who we need to pay more. They need to have gold-plated benefits, and they have to deal with trauma themselves and are themselves traumatized by being faced with it all day. As the brother-in-law to three of them, not all in Kentucky, I know what they have to deal with. I know the world they have to see day in and day out and the children that they have to work with and the struggle. I want to know what the heck happened here and why this failure led to the death of a 7-year-old. Can we talk about that?
Here's where we can go in the midst of investigations. There are two arms of investigations. There's the DCBS arm looking into abuse and neglect. There's the Inspector General's arm looking into the licensure of the facility and the facility's actions or lack thereof in this case. Those are the investigations that we do. The investigations of the Inspector General's office will look at whether this facility continues to be licensed and has complied with the law on training, as you say, on staffing, on staff supervision, all of those areas. That is what is currently being investigated. There is no excuse for a 7-year-old being murdered at the hands, allegedly being murdered at the hands of staff. Sorry, you know that.
Were there prior complaints or investigations about the use of force at that facility?
What we found, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get where I can.
That's not a fantastic answer.
No, I want to give you the answer that I know. Almost all facilities have investigations around those kinds of things. And when you go in on an investigation, you look for patterns. And you look
Was there a pattern at that facility?
Having seen the investigations, and I do have to wait for them to be complete, I would say that would not be an unfounded fear.
Can I say that's a yes?
We have an ongoing investigation.
Then take this investigation out.
Okay.
Just looking at everything before this one. Do you see a pattern at this facility?
The investigators did not see a pattern at this facility prior to this investigation.
But now there might be it's not unfounded. It's some obscure tap dance of a yes. Might be a pattern. That's. I'm not gonna lie, Mr. Secretary, and you and I get along really well. That's a frustrating response to hear. And I feel like there's more information there, and I think we need to know it.
Please allow us to finish our investigations, and I'll be happy to come back here and share what we found.
Do we know when those might be done?
Very soon.
Do we know when that might be? Is that a week? Is that a month? Can you tell us what is lacking in completing the investigation that you need to complete?
The process, because this is a certified facility, is that we investigate. We give a statement of deficiencies to the facility. The facility has a time frame to respond, and they have to respond within that time frame. So we're in that process of the facility responding. It is, I believe, a 15-day response time. I may get the number of days wrong. I'm sorry, but we're close. Once we receive the facility's response.
How many children are in the state's custody in this facility and others around the state today?
After this incident, we stopped placing children there as we began the investigation. The investigation includes interviews, many of which were difficult to do, as there has been a lot of lawyers involved, and this is an open legal case as well as our investigation. So we interview other staff members. We looked at other complaints, whether they were made or not, realized that this facility has been licensed and providing services for many years. So we do not place any children in any unlicensed facility or has that any kind of risk that has been lifted to the Inspector General nor to DCVS. Once this incident happened, we began our investigation, which means tons of interviews, not only with folks to work there at that particular cottage, and with those particular staff that were part of the whole, but everyone else so that we can get the cultural pieces as well as the understanding of how they are, how children are treated there. That's part of our investigation. The Inspector General does exactly the same thing, and both are in alignment, as well as police officers, legal investigation. Those investigations are currently active, almost at the end, and that's what happened here, and that's what happened at every facility. We move into the same type of investigation in regards to figuring out what could be validated, what's happened, and then we make recommendations. We have stopped placing children, of course, immediately after this happened, and we are in the process of removing, I believe, about 10 children that were in another cottage available there. So while the investigation is going on, the children get removed and no children get placed, and that's our standard from whenever there's a concern around a facility. Lisa has been around a lot longer than me, so you may want to add to see if there's any other part of the process that I missed.
Before Commissioner Dennis replies or answers, Commissioner Marstraub, do you know how many are in your care today?
How many children?
Yes, ma'am.
At that facility?
All of them? Everywhere.
Oh,
today.
about
What is your census
in
count
residential?
to-
We were at almost 10,000 when I got here, and we are about 7,000 now. Because our work on prevention and on getting children back into the community has really paid off, and we're about, I would say, about 7,000 at this point across the state, and several of them out of state, which we do not want. Our goal is to have limited amount of time in residential. We've reduced it by 3,000. We'll continue to go down every year on that, and we have enhanced our community partnerships so that we can have prevention. As you know, you all approved the Prevention and Community Wellbeing Unit. What that work is about getting a hold of families before they get to DCVS, before we have to go to court and ask a judge if we can take care of that child or not.
Okay.
So about 7,000 right now. Is that accurate?
We have approximately 8,600 children in out-of-home care
Sorry.
right now. And in residential care, it's under, I'll double check these numbers, but I believe it's under like 800. I think it's closer to 600, but let me double check, between 600 and 800 children in residential care across the state.
This particular facility, there are 2 levels, but four individually licensed groups. There are 3 psychiatric residential treatment facilities, which is where this child was in a psychiatric residential treatment facility. I believe there's still 7. We started out with 18. We're down to 7 children who are in DCBS custody who are in one of those 3 facilities. There is also a licensed residential facility there, and we are at, I can't remember the number, Lisa, I'm sorry.
I think there were closer to approximately 40 children in the residential program, but I will confirm those
But
numbers.
that's just at that facility, at
Correct.
Brookline.
Yeah,
Right.
and so they're Brookline's 4
Understood.
separately licensed facilities. I just
Right.
want to make that clear.
Right. Do have a couple of questions. Representative Nemus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of things swirling in my mind right now. I know that the people that work at 7 counties in Brookline have given their lives to protecting kids, and that's something to be commended. We know that is part of the context here, and so these are largely people who've done the Lord's work, literally the Lord's work on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kentucky and care about these kids. We've got this situation is not isolated. You do a search on Google, you can see a lot of things that happen in foster care and in other situations. But I want to talk, just to get some background, or just so I'll know on who's doing the investigations. I know you can't answer a lot of our questions. Completely understand that and respect that. But you did use the word murder. And so we've got, I think, 2 investigations that you've mentioned today. Those are both under you.
Yes.
Okay, that seems like a problem for me. If we're using the word murder, why is KSP not involved? Why is the Attorney General not making an investigation? And I'm not saying that that's necessary, but you used the word murder. I hadn't heard that before. I thought it was about neglect. But if it's something more than that, when we're bringing the concepts of homicide in, That does not need to be under the Secretary of the Cabinet. It needs to be under law enforcement.
Nothing criminal is under, the LMPD is involved.
So you're retracting the murder comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So this might be.
I tried to put alleged in front of it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, even alleged murder is a homicide question. So, have we talked to the Attorney General or somebody outside of the cabinet doing the investigation? Because I'm not taking any. I'm not casting any aspersions at you, but I'm saying we know organizations that investigate themselves might not be the most desirable way to get to where we need to go.
We collaborate with LMPD. We collaborate with all
With LMPD or KSP?
LMPD.
LMPD. Because this facility.
Sorry, Louisville Metro Police.
Because this facility is in Louisville.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Representative, name as the coroner who did the exam called it murder. The coroner's report.
Has anybody been terminated? Anybody been prosecuted? Anybody been charged? Anybody? I mean, was there anybody arrested?
I know folks have been terminated. I do not know their arrest. I don't know any of that criminal, where that is in the criminal.
The people who've been terminated, those are private employees or public employees?
Private.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Blanton.
I withdraw my request. Representative Neiman's covered what I was wanting to cover. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Senator Schroeder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask about not so much the facility incident, but just more the investigation policies in general. And this was brought to my attention. I talked to Senator Westerfield after I saw a story by the Courier and Press that mentioned two parents who were reported multiple times, and they now stand accused of neglecting a child, resulting in death, stowing the body of the child in Owensboro in a storage unit for several months. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Are you familiar with this story? And just to give the members of this committee some background, with the interview of two additional children, victim 2 said that the suspects put victim's 1 body in a plastic storage container, brought it with them to Owensboro. There was a search warrant, extra storage space where they allegedly recovered the human remains. A little more information here. Let's see here. Detectives said the parents of the 2 surviving children told different stories. Victim 2 said she woke up in the basement, and at one point, victim 2 said she tried to go upstairs to sneak food to victim 1, but she tried to give it to her. Victim 1 fell over and stopped breathing. Victim 2 also reportedly told police that the alleged defendant began to laugh at the sight of the unresponsive child. Victim 2 claimed Porter then said, "We killed one of them." Now I want to go down to the part. It says, according to Evansville Police Department detectives, the Kentucky Department of Child Services had numerous assessments on file, tracking back at least to February 2021, a year before the child died. A person called and said that Porter, this is the alleged defendant, makes her sleep on the floor in feces. Another caller said that victim 1 was often locked in the room, called the devil's child. Let's see here. It said, according to the Evansville Police Department detectives, contact was only made with the defendants and children over the phone. Following the report, never substantiated any claims. And I was just wondering and I know you all have a difficult job, and I know your investigators have a difficult job, so I'm not sitting here, saying it's easier, that we expect it to be easy, but help us understand the level of attention that these kind of situations receive. If you could just walk us through that, please.
Sure, and it's where I began. These are all difficult cases. The most difficult cases are the ones that are multi-state. So the Evansville, Indiana folks said that DCBS was doing investigations relative to these folks. So there's their release of information, right? So indeed, oftentimes in cases where a child death occurs, we often find that DCBS has had some initial investigations. I can't back up from that. It's true. And also what is most difficult is how, and we've seen this a couple of times, particularly multi-state, where somebody's going back and forth across state lines. Us being at the house when the child is there and being able to lay eyes on exactly what's happening is one of the greatest investigatory challenges I think we face. When we review cases, and this was several years ago now, when the child fatality is involved, we now have a group that looks with us at why was something potentially missed? Where was it missed in the system, and how can we improve our systems to hopefully not miss it in the future? But all too often we've been involved. Child fatality review panel often sees that DCBS has been in a home multiple times.
Are there changes that the panel has recommended for you all to make at the investigation level or the intake level or anywhere to try to stop that from happening? This goes back to the case that led to the panel in the first place, the Amy Dye case, right close to my neck of the woods.
Yes.
That's where this came from, and we're still not getting it right. It is hard, and Senator Schroeder's right on the nose.
And Mr. Chair, if I could maybe be a little more specific, I guess what I'm wondering, at what level, when you hear something like a child's being locked in a closet, at what level does that then go from, hey, this should be a phone call, to hey, this needs to be a visit in person?
Do you want to speak to that, Lisa?
We always the pandemic created some challenges with initiation, but our policy is the face-to-face contact with the child victim and family. So I mean that we don't normally. We will not be making a phone call to initiate an investigation. We would be making an unannounced home visit to the family and interviewing the child privately and separately. We oftentimes initiate, for school-age children, investigations at the school or a neutral setting, so that we again can interview that child privately and confidentially. And like I said, our policy is to initiate and have face-to-face contact.
I think that's the best answer I've heard all day. Thank you.
Yeah. And just with your permission, I just want to say I sit on the fatality and near fatality. Every case, every coroner's report, every forensic exam is reviewed. We looked at missed opportunities, and we go back to those workers. We go back to that system. We look at systemic issues. For example, not enough staff, a supervisor was not there, etc. That is a collaborative process with a fatality and near fatality review. And every case of near fatality or fatality gets reviewed by the committee. I am part of that. We get to answer. We get to get feedback. We get to collaborate on what needs to happen next. The most difficult part of my job is reading those reports. It's sickening to see what happens to our kids. A lot of the time, we're also looking, these workers are working in real time, and when we look back, we see missed opportunities that could have been there. We take care of a lot of children that don't end up dead. However, the ones that die, one is too many, and it is undefensible. However, this is an incredibly difficult job to do by our workers, and we have systems in place internally and externally with the panel to address that. When we have partners, such as residential facilities, who are also responsible for care of their kids, we have certifications and licenses that they need to have in order to do that. And look at what happened to Jesse. So it is the challenge of our DCBS. We have many challenges, but this one is the most painful and the hardest one, to have children in our custody and us not being able to protect them.
Were the workers involved in Jayceon's case certified or
All part of the requirement for that agency to be licensed and have the appropriate staff running the units that these kids were in.
Do you believe that they had adequate training?
That training is being evaluated now as part of the investigation.
Prior to this, had there been any concern about the training?
They have not.
Senator Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is, you're a statewide agencies, and this seems as this problem is not just limited to any one specific area. And do you have any specific type of policy that you send out to all of the employees involved in this, so that if that one in my county or any of my counties gets a call and says, we've got this, as you heard the facts that my good friend Senator Schroeder said here about the child, the phone call, does that automatically direct somebody at that agency, employee in whatever county that is, to go and check, call the police, or do anything, or is it just discretionary with those people? Do you have written rules for those people, employees, to follow?
That is the policy, sir.
Well, I'm not, okay, thank you. But my question is, do you have specific ones, so if you get something, that goes out in a format of some type to every office in the state, so that they all follow on? If you get a call that this child, like these acts occurred to that child, that you automatically go and check or call the police and go with the police to check?
Yes, there are statutes, regulations, policies, all that cover very specific how we do it, what our time frame is for all offices and all workers.
There's one more question. Sure.
And that includes a face-to-face visit to the home as part of the investigation, unannounced.
So all your employees in the state, if I ask one in my county, they know that they got to follow that policy, and they've got it there in their office to look at, to follow.
If they receive that kind of concern, yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? It's troubling, Mr. Secretary.
It is.
I'm concerned, and I would like to have you back when those investigations are done. We'll be back in 19 days in this building on a regular basis, and I'd love to have you back. I can't convene the joint committee at that time, but and I can't speak for the new chair, Elliott. But if we're going to do it one chamber at a time, I'm happy to do it for my half. But I'd also like to know more about the fatality and near fatality review panel and the connection between what their recommendations are and what you're doing and acting on that, how frequently you're acting on it. Yeah, Senator, please.
Mr. Chairman, in addressing the panel, we passed legislation last session that the recommendations that are made by that panel, in the past, nothing happened with that. They were just sent to agencies. There were reports. There was no accountability for that. And the bill that we passed does require one of two actions. The entity that was responsible for the action that led to the recommendation, they have to make changes, one, or two, if they're not going to make changes, they have to report back to the review panel as to why they did not make any changes. Correct. That was step number one, and we look to put more teeth into the work of the review panel as we move forward to make sure that things are being done properly. I know there are some concerns that I think, if I'm not mistaken, DCBS chooses which cases the panel hears. That's a concern for me in how that's done. But I think that there is a lot of cooperation and a lot of communications in these efforts. And I know from my perspective, as being named the new chair of the Families and Children Committee, that's priority number one for me. Child abuse and neglect in this state has got to, we've got to get our numbers down. We've got to do a better job of protecting our children. I've dealt with this throughout my entire career in law enforcement. I dealt with it, worked side by side with DCBS on hundreds of cases throughout a 24-year career. And I know the frustrations that they deal with, and I know how difficult those cases are to work. They're often impossible. to come to a satisfactory conclusion in really knowing what happened in those events. I know from my current position in operating an early childhood education center, we deal with complaints. We have children that come in that we suspect have been abused. There's a process that we go through. Can I say that I always feel comfortable with that process and that there's enough being done? I can't at all. There have been a couple times that I end up calling something, we get a response, not satisfied with it. I call my police officer friends and they follow up. So it's not perfect, but I think often it's just the enormity and the numbers that are dealt with and the lack of having appropriate numbers of social workers and the training and the time to really look into all of these cases as they should be. So as I think we need to be careful about trying to assign blame. This is a massive problem at many different levels that we have to look at. But I'm glad that we are looking at that, and it's sad that it takes incidents like this for us to really step up and look at it, because it's been a problem for decades,
Right.
And we do have a lot of work to do. But I know in my committee, and I'm hoping my colleague in the other chamber, and knowing her, I'm sure that's going to be a priority for her also. But the review panel is a good step. I think we can make that better. Our social workers, we need more. There needs probably more understanding on the relationship between the social worker and law enforcement, because that varies depending on the jurisdiction, on how those relationships and how much communication, how much they work together. And so there is a lot to discuss through this issue, and it's not something we're going to solve quickly. And I hope it is something that we can work together on to make this better. It's not acceptable in our state, and I know you all in no way are pleased with where we are in that area, and I hope we can work to make that better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I have one final question. How many fatalities have there been in Kentucky? Child fatalities of children in state custody or care? Say the last 20 years.
20 years.
Well, we don't have that for the last 20 years. We can get that to you because we.
Then as far back as you can.
Do you know, Secretary?
You have it. 'Cause
How many fatalities,
We-
and to the extent that the panel has been around, how many near fatalities? I don't know those numbers.
We have the Child Abuse and Neglect Annual Report, child fatalities, that was sent to you all in September.
Okay.
So you should have a copy of that.
Lisa has it.
It's actually, the fatalities have not increased at any level, but this is the graph that I got from them, Lisa.
Yeah, so state fiscal year 2021, we had 209 near fatalities. And that data for 2022 has remained fairly consistent. It's not complete for 2022 yet, but we are seeing no about the same numbers for 2022 as in 2021. Now we can look further back.
200 and what?
I'm sorry, 209
And 9 for the last.
for 2021.
Right.
And then we're trending around similar numbers for 2022. And that's fatality and near fatality.
Right.
So we can break that down and get more information, and we go back as far, as we can go back further.
Well, I appreciate it. I thank all three of you. Secretary, if you don't mind, let us know, let Roberta, let me know as soon as you all are done with your investigations, because I'd like to have you back.
We'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Secretary Harvey. And Commissioner Reed, come on up. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Commissioner, thank you for being here as well. I appreciate it. I know you're getting a slide turned on there. Members, we actually have a handout here if you want a copy of this, what they're going to show. We got it a little last minute. So so we didn't have that prepared and ready to go. This is a serious situation, just as serious as the last one. This one's particularly concerning since this isn't the first time we've had this agency in front of this committee talking about issues like this. We've had a riot at Adair County where staff was hurt, other youth were hurt. One youth was reportedly sexually assaulted by other youth. We have news coverage and reporting of grave failings at DJJ within the Justice Cabinet. And the problems that you all came and reported to this interim committee a little over a year ago, roughly a year ago, seem to persist, evidently persist. And so here we are. I believe, and Representative Nemes, you correct me if I'm wrong, but a month or so ago, it was unconstitutional for you to move boys and girls into separate facilities, but now it's not. A year ago, you were telling us what those of us that work in juvenile justice know a lot already, that you didn't have adequate staffing ratios, but we're going to open a whole new facility. And I don't know who we're going to staff that with and still maintain any sort of decent, adequate staffing ratio. We could talk about a lot of issues, but I wanted you to come and tell us what happened in Adair County and what you're doing to fix it. I hope that salary increases and additional staff feature prominently in your remarks, but I'm interested to hear what else you've got. So please, you have the floor.
Commissioner?
All righty. Thank you for inviting us here today to provide context as to why the other reason we were talking here, the Jefferson Regional Juvenile Detention Center in Linden is temporarily offline, and I'll address some of these others too. As you're aware, I am Commissioner Reed, and Secretary Harvey is here with me today. I did have a slide, which I realized didn't get distributed, but I just wanted to kind of mention that because it does sort of put in context some of the issues that we're having today. As our male detention population, as of yesterday, 48% of the kids that were there are for capital murder offenses, felony A, felony B, and felony C. We have 27% for felony D and another 25% for misdemeanors and status offenses. These are our male population. By far, those are our greatest numbers. Girls are much less. We usually don't get more than 20 spread across the state. And generally speaking, they tend to be on, not always, but generally speaking, on lower level offenses. Unfortunately, these numbers have factored significantly into what the situations we've been facing and the decisions that we've had to make. With that said, the work the Department of Juvenile Justice does is largely unseen. We work behind closed and locked doors with a population that many people have a hard time understanding. The work that we can do is hard, it can be very dangerous, and it can also be very rewarding. When you make a difference in the life of a child and know that you've turned them around, there's just generally no better feeling. We are always working to create a better, safer Kentucky for now and for future generations. At DJJ, we have the opportunity to intervene and change lives for the better, helping kids get the services they need to create a solid foundation for a successful future. Our team is comprised of dedicated, passionate, and compassionate individuals who choose to do this important work in what has proven to be increasingly difficult and dangerous situations. And I do want them to know, and I want you to know, too, that they are valued for their contributions to the Commonwealth and our at-risk youth. I now want to take a few minutes to contextualize our operations, as it can be kind of confusing because we do use a lot of different terminology than you do for adult corrections. Within DJJ, we have different types of residential facilities, 3. We have, and this is a little bit different because a lot of states don't do detention. They just do the post disposition. But we have juvenile detention centers, and these house mainly kids after an arrest before they've been convicted or sentenced, or in the term, which I'm sure some of you know and others don't, adjudicated is the juvenile term that we use. Our youth development centers and group homes serve the post-adjudication population after a youth has either pled guilty or been found guilty and either committed or sentenced into our care. So we have two different types of residential facilities post-adjudication. These are youth development centers. These are residential treatment centers for youth who have committed or sentenced to DJJ as a final disposition of their case. We have an in-depth classification process, and youth are housed based on their risk score and other factors. We operate 6 youth development centers, and they're spread throughout the state. The terms youth development center and juvenile detention are often used interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. They have very different purposes, and sometimes folks have a hard time separating those two out. The other facilities we operate are group homes, and these are smaller residential facilities, usually no more than 8 or 10, that are often for our younger, our lower level offenders. They're a step down from one of our other residential, like a youth development center, and sometimes for other specific needs we use those. Our youth development centers and our group homes are treatment facilities, and careful consideration is made in determining which place and what type of facility is most appropriate for the youth once the court process is done. We have the ability then to separate and customize placement to fit that youth's unique needs, and each youth receives a comprehensive treatment plan. We also operate day treatment centers where youth receive education and counseling services while they remain in their own homes. These are treatment programs for post-adjudication and pre-adjudication youth, as well as some youth who are not in DJJ's custody. They get referred by the court and sometimes by their local school system. We operate 6, and we have other day treatment centers that we contract with throughout the state. So to reiterate, our juvenile detention centers are for our pre-adjudication youth, for youth after arrest, processing through the court. Youth who are in juvenile court do not have the right to bail. So what they get instead is they have a detention hearing, which occurs 24 to 48 hours, exclusive of weekends and holidays, and then the decision is made whether they're going to remain detained or be released. Our juvenile detention centers, really in a nutshell, can be thought of as serving a similar function to adult jails, and that's more or less what the purpose is. We currently house youth ranging across all offenses, all risk levels, ages, and needs. While many are there for a very short time, some just a few hours, some a few days, some weeks, some months, or even years, as their case works their way through the judicial process. And for example, there are cases when the court decides to try that child as an adult, and at that point, if they are tried adult, they can get bail, but oftentimes they cannot make it, obviously, and so they remain in custody. We actually have kids in our detention centers who will stay years. We've had, I think, one youth up to 3 years in a juvenile detention center. These kids in our care are our responsibility, but their ultimate disposition is unclear until the final disposition of their case. So this impacts the type of services we are able to offer. It's difficult to meaningfully engage in a full range of programs for this population, as their time at a detention center is unpredictable. I have a lot of kids coming and going all the time. An increasing number of the detained population have gang affiliations and continue their violent behavior inside the detention facility, targeting staff and targeting other youth. Detention staff have to be able to handle a wide variety of youth and situations. Youth who are actively suicidal, pregnant, autistic, or have medical issues including diabetes, cancer, epilepsy, or heart conditions. Juvenile justice youth are known to have some of the worst physical health of any kids in the nation. I want to make sure I give you an accurate and fair picture of what a juvenile detention center is like, so you understand the circumstances our youth and staff are under and the needs that must be met to effectively offer security and services to the best of our abilities. So that leads me to the topic that I believe I was asked to present on today, which is about the Jefferson Regional Detention Center, located in Linden, and it opened in January 2020 after the budget cuts forced the city of Louisville to close its local detention facility. In October, we announced that the facility would operate as a holdover facility. This was a way to reduce the population and disrupt violence and behavioral issues. We were planning to house approximately 12 to 14 juveniles until their initial detention hearing. For any who had been ordered to be detained longer, if they came back after the detention hearing, then we would transport them to another one of our state facilities. However, a couple of weeks later in November, a test fire alarm raised questions about the system's functionality. When DJJ's facility management raised their serious concern for the fire safety of that building, we immediately decided to move the youth from Jefferson until that circumstance was clarified. This was a decision made at the departmental and cabinet level based on the advice of our facility staff. Neither the fire marshal nor any other outside office was involved in that decision. The detention center is receiving upgrades to the locks, the fire alarm system, and control center, which will need to be completed prior to moving forward. Until the facility is cleared for occupancy, male juveniles from Jefferson are directed to another detention center. The governor recently announced that the detained youth will be housed based on offense level so that we can treat differing populations in a manner consistent with the different security considerations that they present. This new approach recognizes that the detained youth population we serve today differs from those served over 20 years ago when the juvenile justice system was designed. I support these changes, and DJJ will implement the new system beginning next year. After improvements are completed at our Jefferson facility, an option could be housing low-level male offenders at that facility, but again, those decisions are still being made. So I'll now turn it over to Secretary Harvey, and I'll be happy to answer any questions once he's finished.
Thank you.
Turn your mic on, Secretary.
There you go. Is that better? We've had a lot of news lately and a lot of important announcements regarding juvenile justice, and I'd like to speak about those. And you are correct that there are problems, and some of these problems are relatively new. Some of these problems go back years or even decades. So in my judgment, it's impossible to understand the current issues without understanding a little bit about how we got here and about the history. The current juvenile detention system was envisioned and implemented, I think, about 20 years ago. And as far as I understand, the basic structure of that system has not changed much over the last 20 years, even though the nature of the detained population has changed a great deal. The centerpiece of the system that was designed 20 years ago was the establishment of relatively small, regionalized detention facilities. The detention system that was designed back then seemed to have a clear priority, and that was to detain youths as close to home as possible. Now, there were benefits and merits to that priority. There were added conveniences for local law enforcement, for defense attorneys, and for the families of the youths. So detaining youths close to home certainly had considerable advantages. This approach, however, as any approach, carries with it trade-offs, and there were disadvantages to the system that was designed 20 years ago. Keeping youths closer to home meant that boys and girls would be housed together, and that was a decision that was made 20 years ago, and that was a decision that stood until a few weeks ago. Keeping youths closer to home also meant that boys and girls were not only detained under one roof, but serious offenders would be detained under one roof with less serious offenders. So under the system that has prevailed, you would have truants and runaways housed alongside youths who were charged with murder. This system that we've operated under mirrors the system utilized in many states, probably most states, but as you know, it carries with it certain shortcomings. The policymakers that designed the current system accepted these shortcomings in order to keep the youths as close to home as possible. But as I indicated, and as I think everyone knows, the population that is in our detention facilities today differs a great deal from what we saw 20 years ago. In fact, today, we often will have between 10 and 20 youths, as hard as it is for me to imagine, in juvenile detention across the state that are charged with murder, and many more who are charged with first-degree robbery, with other serious gun crimes. In fact, I think about 46% of our currently detained population is charged with a Class C felony or above. And it's really worse than that. This violent activity today is much more likely to be organized violence, often in the form of gang-related violence, as opposed to episodic violence.
What information is there to support that claim, the organized violence?
I think the information comes from the detention facilities themselves. The youths tell our workers, they're very free with this, that they're involved in gangs and that they actually are elevated in the gangs when they commit an assault on our staff or on other youth. So the source for that's pretty direct.
I'm relieved to hear that there's information flowing uphill that you're getting, because other information that's coming from your facilities about their physical plant failings and lack of security controls and adequate safety measures in place apparently aren't making it through.
Well,
can you respond to that?
Yeah, certainly I can respond to that. I know there's been some discussion about ceilings, and I'll confess that my knowledge of the ceilings in the facilities is probably limited. And you're right, Mr. Chairman, I don't know everything that the Commissioner of the Department of Juvenile Justice know. I can tell you about this ceiling incident. I found out that we had what I was told were drop ceilings in some of these facilities when we had an incident in Warren County in June. Now, I've been told since then that actually these are not exactly drop ceilings, that they actually are a little more substantial than that. But when we had this incident in Warren County, we immediately directed that we do everything we could to expedite the procurement process to mitigate that particular issue. Now, I've learned since then, and I did not know this when I appeared before the committee in October, that it was included in the ordinary maintenance funding and the capital funding, that it was scheduled to deal with these ceilings. And I will confess that I don't know every item on the maintenance schedule for these buildings. When I learned about it was when there was an incident that was related to it. So I hope that is a fuller explanation of that incident.
It is a bit, but it still makes me concerned about what information's reaching your desk and what information isn't, or what information's reaching the commissioner's desk. The allegation that, based on your staff, the departmental staff, in monthly reports that I didn't know existed till I've seen it in the news coverage, but say, Commissioner, the opposite of what you testified to a year ago in front of this committee regarding whether or not you detain juveniles for lack of staff. But the reports say that you do. Your own staff reporting that says, are you not also concerned about the inconsistency there?
Commissioner, I don't receive those monthly reports. These are departmental communications.
Unless they involve gang information, apparently.
Well, I think we have...
You see the inconsistency I'm struggling with.
No,
some things you're getting, and some things you're not getting. Some things you're responsible for as secretary, and some things you're not. And only the commissioner would know. I'm troubling myself to figure out.
I'm responsible for everything that goes on in the
Indeed
cabinet.
you are.
I'm responsible for the quality of the meal that will be served for lunch in a correctional facility today, and I understand that. But you're right. I don't know everything about the department that the commissioner knows. I doubt that she knows everything about an individual facility that a superintendent would know. Information, like in any organization, flows up the chain, and sometimes that's not perfect. And that is certainly an issue that we constantly work on. But Commissioner, I'll ask you to address the question on the table.
Right. Let me address the monthly reports. Those are an ACA requirement. When those are done, it's sort of a recap. There's generally very little that's in the monthly reports that I haven't already been involved with. I meet on a regular basis with all our superintendents, and I meet with them individually by their grouping. I meet with the detention superintendents. I meet with the YDC superintendents. I meet with the group home. I meet with the day treatments. I'm aware of all of their issues. Well, not all of them, but most of them. You know, we have been aware that staffing was an issue for some time. Obviously, that's been on our. I have made no secret about that. I have gone all around the state. I have talked to judges. I have talked to others and have said, you know, our number one issue that's holding us back from being safe, secure, programming, everything is having adequate numbers of staff. This is a relationship business, and it's not just adequate numbers. It's the ability to be able to retain them, because just having them there, if they're turning over all the time, it takes a while to get good at this. And sometimes, unfortunately, what happens when you get really good is you move on up the chain to other jobs, and then we're left with, lesser known people down the floor to actually do these things. So that's something, I have talked about. I think if you talk to any of our superintendents, they would tell you that I am there for them, that all they have to do is email, call me. I have probably, I would imagine, I'm going to make a guess here, that I'm the first superintendent or first commissioner that in their first year went to every single facility. And I've been in many of them multiple times. I've looked at these issues. We involved with the ceilings. I wish I could do like a homeowner and pick up the phone and call and say, come repair it. But there's procurements and regulations that I'm governed by. As required by KRS, any project that exceeds an agency authority of $10,000 for a single quote or $20,000 for multiple quotes requires an engineer or an architect of record and must go through the Finance and Administration Cabinet's Division of Engineering and Contract Administration. The casino repairs we did earlier at Adair cost $200,000. I think we're $400,000. I can't just write a check and make those things happen. They have to go up through the processes. And I know it's frustrating when our staff, when they have to deal with these things, and I understand their frustration too. I'm frustrated that we don't have enough staff. I do want to say that we are making progress, I think, and I'm very encouraged by what we're doing, but I have made no secret of that.
And I would just say, again, I believe, others perhaps may not, but I'm quite certain that there is gang activity in the juvenile detention facilities.
I don't deny that. I'm going on your word. My objection wasn't your allegation, though I was curious about the basis for it. My concern is that some things are getting through to the people that make decisions, and some things don't seem to be getting through. Or some things are coming through on a report but are neglected or ignored or overlooked. The concerns are how the youths are treated. And again, you all were here a year ago and you were talking about not having adequate staff and pay not being sufficient. I didn't see a budget request come through. We need to spend more money, but I need to know what you want us to spend. We also don't see anything. Are there other, Commissioner, you talked about the threshold for getting approvals with the Finance Cabinet. Are you telling me that there are a list of them we're waiting at Finance for to go through that? Because if all of them that you need are in excess of that $10,000 threshold, I assume if we called Finance Cabinet in here, they could say, yeah, here's the laundry list they're asking for, and we're working on it. And if if that's where they are, that's great. But I don't think that's the case. So
I'll address what you said about the budget request. I think that's very important. As we've said, I think we've made no secret, at least from the time that I've been in this job, hiring and retaining adequate staff, not only for DJJ, but for the Department of Corrections as well.
Yeah, I've actually said, Secretary, sorry to interrupt, but I want to tell you, what happened at Adair, I'm stunned hasn't happened at a prison in the state. Stunned that we've managed to go through a couple of administrations without there being a huge issue.
I don't disagree with you, Senator, and I would say this: if anyone has criticisms of the recruitment efforts that we've made, I'm certainly open to hearing those. But I will tell you that I have spent, not just me, but the senior staff that came with me, we've spent more time trying to find money and resources to hire and retain staff for these facilities, not just juvenile facilities, but adult correctional facilities, than anything else we've done since I've been on this job. I think my second week on the job, I went down to Eddyville, it's close to home for me, and went through that facility. I was shocked, I was scared, I was saddened at what our staff was doing with so little resources. And I told the folks that went with me on the way home, this is the biggest challenge we have. In terms of the juvenile justice youth workers, they've had 3 significant increases in pay in the last year. The governor...
What's their average pay today with those increases?
When I got to this job, when I quote statistics, I could get in trouble. So if this is wrong, it's not intentional. But I believe the starting pay was $14.42 an hour for a entry-level youth worker. I think today it's probably somewhere around $22, $23 an hour. So we've done that inside of 12 months. And we've done that. The governor helped us provide a 10% bump, I think, last December. The General Assembly in its budget provided another 8%, which we appreciate. Just recently, I think in probably October, we were able to cobble together some things by cannibalizing some vacancies to find some money, and we were able to increase some of the wages to the midpoint. We provided some additional locality pay where we had particular trouble. So I would say all of these actions were necessary, but I would not say that those actions are sufficient. But we're limited in what we can do. And I would say this. I spend time with our wardens. I go to wardens meetings. I spend time with our Department of Juvenile Justice people, and I think it's fair to say their biggest concern is recruiting and retaining an adequate staff. They tell me that the biggest impediment they have, and they're on the front lines, I'm not, they tell me the biggest impediment they have are the changes that were made to the pension system. And I understand that there were obviously good reasons to do that. But that weakened the tie between these employees and their jobs. And that's something that's not in our control. But I'm happy to work with all of you to find ways to be more successful at recruiting and retaining a staff, because I agree with you that that is a baseline issue that we have to get right, or it's going to be very difficult going forward.
I've got a question. I've got a couple others that have some questions here. You don't have adequate staffing ratio today. You didn't a year ago. You don't today. We've obviously been able to appropriate a lot more money. I'd love to give you another 8% and another 8 after that. And just like the social workers under Secretary Friedlander and all the frontline workers with CHFS, your folks need gold-plated everything. I wish I could give them all of it. I wish I could increase their pay. I've said this before, your lab techs with state police need hazard benefits. They deserve it. And I'd be the first to vote for it. But you don't have adequate staffing today. How can you open another facility in Campbell County?
Well, we're not opening another facility. That's what we've done at the moment. And we're making transitions to try to meet this, to try to update this outdated system.
So you're just shuffling the kids to different facilities to separate the gender?
Yes, sir. And let me tell you how that came about. And I know the discussion I had with Representative Nemes in October, and as I said then, I'll say again, sir, I respect you, I respect your opinions, and I want you to know that after that discussion, you know, we didn't just walk out the door and forget about that. When I think that very day or the next day, I asked my staff to do 4 or 5 things arising from our discussion. One is I wanted to know whether or not what we were doing now was legal. I'm told that it was, that what we were doing with having boys and girls together. And I'm told that's the way that it's done in most states, which doesn't make it a good idea, but that seems to be the state of play. I also asked if separating the boys and girls would have legal problems. And I am concerned, you know, when you treat genders differently based on gender, I think that can be a concern. Our legal staff did some research. I think they found one case that was not directly on point, but similar, that would give us some confidence that we could proceed as the governor has ordered, which was consistent with what you certainly recommended, I think. And the other thing that I did is ask our department staff, I asked the commissioner to start working on a plan to separate the boys and the girls. Because as I said, when you and I were having that discussion, I certainly don't think housing them together is ideal. I don't, you know, that again, that was a decision that was made 20 years ago, and it's been changed now. But I say that so that you'll know that we didn't ignore what you had to say, and we went back and started taking actions to deal with that circumstance. So you're right, we're not opening a new facility, and where we were, and this you know, everything that happens sort of has a cascade effect. Campbell County had been actually shuttered for some period of time because we simply couldn't hire any staff in northern Kentucky. I think that happened last fall, probably, that we just said we can't keep any kids there because we don't have any staff. So as time went on and we were able to make some of these enhancements, we were able to bring on some staff, not enough staff to fully operate the facility in Campbell County, but I think we got to the point where we could keep 15 or 20 youths in that facility, certainly, and I think it's probably designed for, 40 maybe? So when the governor made the decision to separate the boys and girls, and we sort of looked across the map, well, Campbell County couldn't keep all of the kids from northern Kentucky, but at that point in time, they had enough staff to keep around 20 kids, which is adequate generally to house the girl population in detention. It seemed from what I've seen that usually will range between 12 and 20 roughly. So that's how that decision came about. There's not a new facility that's being opened. But you and I are in complete agreement, I think, about the need to find ways to solve the staffing issue. And as I said in October, and I mean this, we're open to any constructive, creative suggestion to do that. I can tell you that in addition to these increases that we've provided, we've got a professional recruiter that works on this full time. We've done job fairs after job fair. We've done advertising to try to bring in staff. And as the commissioner said, since October, it's too early to say that it's a trend, I think, but we've seen increased interest in these jobs. So we hope that we'll see some improvement, but we are at the mercy of the labor market that is very difficult for everyone at the moment.
Got a couple other questions here. Senator Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple to lead in. Let's go back to Adair County. Maybe a statement that you made earlier about the folks that were in Adair County that started the riot and overpowered the guard. What kind of classification were these folks? I mean, were these like Class A felonies, Class B felonies, or were these lesser offenders?
I don't have each kid and each offense, but I do know that the majority of them were serious offenders.
Okay,
and
so
most kids there are.
All right, so which I guess leads me to another question. You don't have all the classifications, so you're telling me that there were some low-level offenders in with murderers and rapists and these very serious offenders.
Yes, sir.
On what planet does that make any sense whatsoever? I mean, that's like, I read it in the paper, and that's why I wanted you here today to ask this question. It sounds like the most asinine thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Sir, I appreciate your sentiment, and the governor has announced that we're going to change that. And what I would say is that is the system that was established in Kentucky 20 years ago and that has prevailed across a number of administrations, Republican and Democrat, and a number of general assemblies. We're changing that. The governor has announced that what we're going to do is try to identify kids by the nature of what they're charged with that are more likely to be violent or disruptive in the juvenile detention facility and treat them a little differently and not mistreat them, but to have enhanced security measures and to just recognize that they have the potential to pose a greater safety risk. Okay. And then the lower level offenders will be housed in facilities that are designed for lower level offenders. So that's the transition that we're going to be making.
Which kind of leads me into another question. What defensive measures did you give these guards that were overpowered to defend themselves when this riot occurs? Because at least when I'm looking at it in the paper, it looks like, a little jar of mace or something. I'm thinking like, here you have somebody with pepper spray guarding people charged with capital murder and rapists. I mean, I'm surprised somebody's not been killed yet, if that's in fact the truth. Is that the truth?
Senator, that is the truth. The system has existed, I think, for 20 years. The youth workers, they don't have pepper spray. They don't have tasers. They don't have any non-lethal defensive weaponry. I can tell you that all that is under review.
And so you have rapists and murderers guarded by probably middle-aged people that against 15 and 16-year-olds in their prime that have been able to kill somebody. You think these people can actually control these facilities? And again, on what planet does that make any sense?
Well, in fact, we don't think that's appropriate, and that's why the governor has announced that system is changing. Okay. But what I'm telling you is that that's the system that has prevailed in the Commonwealth for many years.
Well, let's talk about it. You said this has been the system that's in place for 20 years. Sounds like it's the worst damned idea I've ever heard of in my entire life. What did we have before?
I think, Senator, there has been a significant change, and I go back, I suppose.
Let me ask, what did we have before we had the current system?
Well, at one point, juveniles were housed county by county. Is that right, Commissioner? The commissioner has a lot more expertise.
Well, you want local?
On this
That's
than
about
me.
as local as you can
it's
get.
About as local.
I mean,
So you might describe that history.
Yeah, I mean, when DJJ was formed, one of the reasons that we were created was because of the juvenile detention situation. There was only 2 separate juvenile detention centers operating in the state. Lexington had one and Jefferson had. Everybody else was kept in an adult jail.
So I'm assuming the 2 detention centers in Lexington and Louisville were those for the most serious offenders, or what? Or did they have kind of a specific
Basically,
population?
Again, is realize that juvenile detention is like an adult jail. You take whoever comes to your door that is brought. Just like you might have somebody in an adult jail that wrote a bad check in the same area with somebody. I mean, all of them come. We had no control over our front door. We serve counties, and when the kids are detained, they're brought to our door.
I mean, it almost makes sense to me. And again, I was in college, probably not thinking much about juvenile detention when I was 24 years old. But obviously I'm thinking about it now in the position that I'm in. What was so wrong with the old system? One, you kept them local where their parents, their community was. Sometimes, heck, I can remember in elementary school, they took us down to the jail to say, you don't want to be here, which was a pretty impression, also, they used to bust our butts in school, which made a fairly good impression, too, as to what you didn't want to do. And we didn't seem like we had half the problems that we have nowadays with this system. Why not go back to putting these kids in jail in their communities? I mean, especially some of these people that are committing murder and rape and extraordinarily serious offenses at 15 or 16 years old. If they're able to do that, they in my opinion, they need to be in an adult jail.
You get into lots of things with that. I mean, one of the things that created the system is youth are like 10 times more likely to commit suicide if they're in an adult jail. And back in that time, this is my benefit to being one of the oldest people in the room probably, because there were several high-profile cases where kids hung themselves. And they got one of the local jails, extreme lawsuit based on that. They paid a lot of money.
You're telling me somebody getting forcibly raped's not going to result in a...
Well, I'm telling you how the system got developed with that. Is that they, and the kids there's no school system for them. We talked about if we don't want kids with, violent kids with lower level kids, we certainly don't want, I think, children in with adults that are much, and the
couldn't
system
you segregate them within county? I mean, did they segregate them within the county jails to could you not put a juvenile wing on them? Or, a lot of jails, I mean, our one in Pikeville actually has a great GED program where they actually have, and they even have a rehab within the jail that tries to get people off drugs and has done successfully in some cases. I mean, could we not look at rehabilitating these kids within the penal system within their own communities?
I think
On a
that's
local
been
level.
all right. I think that if you look back through the years, that was tried for many, many years. That was the norm, and it was found very lacking, not just in Kentucky but across the nation. And national, federal Office of Juvenile Justice, Delinquency Prevention, and other laws actually have a year for which all states have to get kids out of adult jails and prisons.
So you say
Another thing, this can't be said enough. There's been a big change, at least in my opinion, in the level of propensity for violence that we see in the detained youth population today as opposed to 20 years ago. I go back a lot longer than that. In my county attorney days in juvenile court, we would occasionally see a kid who had done something really bad, but most of the kids we saw were status offenders, or they were lower level offenders, and the stay that they would have in juvenile detention usually wouldn't be for more than 3 or 4 weeks. Today, we see a lot more youths who have committed horribly violent crimes and who the courts are processing potentially as adults. And as the commissioner said earlier, those kids, as opposed to staying in a detention facility for a month, they may be there for a year or 2 years. So it creates a different dynamic. Another factor, and I think this is really important, we're seeing youth now, I don't know the reason for this, but a lot more of them have serious mental illness. And in fact, we get kids, and I think this is a terrible situation. We get kids, in fact, one of the kids that you read about a lot from one of our facilities is a child that has, from everything I've seen, active, severe mental illness that renders this child extremely violent, sometimes uncontrollably violent. It's a result of a mental illness from what I've seen about this case, and there are other cases of a similar nature. Well, a child like that who is suffering from an illness, I think we would all agree, doesn't need to be in a detention facility. That child needs to be in a hospital getting medical treatment. But when we take these children to the private psychiatric hospitals, they're not going to take them because these children are very violent, very assaultive, and their staff can't control them, and they're not going to subject their staff to that level of violence. So as a last resort, I suppose, these sick kids are ordered to be detained in our juvenile facilities, our detention facilities. I can tell you, and if we have instances where our staff has behaved inappropriately, there needs to be accountability. But when we are putting sick children in juvenile detention facilities, the outcome's not going to be good because it's a tragedy for that child, and it's a burden that our staff is not well equipped to bear. And that doesn't happen. That's not just
Mr.
a
Chairman,
one-time case.
Obviously, it's a late hour, and I thank you for your indulgence. And Mr. Secretary, maybe I'll follow up with you on a one-to-one basis because this is clearly a very significant issue in this Commonwealth. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence, and appreciate it, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm share the concern, particularly the concern about the status offenders. What is your census count today in facilities in Kentucky?
Actually, hang on, I looked at that. I looked at it I think this was actually yesterday. I haven't looked at today's pop sheet. We had 151 in our residential care, that's post-adjudication, and 192 in detention.
And what's your staff count today?
I don't know.
And
Okay.
can I just say, Chairman, that there are some detention facilities where our staffing is actually pretty good, and there are others where it's really a concern. So it really varies from facility to facility.
And let me say, we have made significant progress. When I came in a little over a year ago, we had staff vacancies across the board. We didn't have enough staff in our group homes and our youth development centers and our detention centers.
Do you have enough staff at Adair County?
I don't believe so, no. And part of that, well, I can go into that.
Hey,
Let
hold
me.
on a second. I want to get through the questions.
Sure.
Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand
over here, Mr. Secretary, Commissioner. I understand what you all are trying to do. We had this conversation, I believe, Secretary, you were here once before, in the pay raises that you've been given to try to encourage new employees. And you talked about, Commissioner, just a moment ago, just a few seconds ago, you said some are well-staffed and some are not. And those that are well-staffed, unfortunately, as much as you're trying to find ways to recruit new people, you're smacking in the face of those that are there that are loyal in the areas that are well-staffed, because now you're hiring people in and paying them more than the people that's been there for years, and people that's been dedicated to the system, to the cabinet. They've been dependable. They've done their jobs well, and now you've came up with a system that's a smack in the face to them, because you're saying that they're not as valuable to you for the jobs they do day in and day out, for the hard work they give you, for the compassion they give you, than it is to hire somebody new in some of these areas. And what I'm afraid of, you're going to start seeing people begin to leave those positions that are well-staffed now. I made this objection previously, and I'll make it again. I'm supportive of giving increases of pay. As a matter of fact, it's a decade overdue, but it has to be equal for everybody. You cannot hire somebody in and pay them more than somebody that's been there 10 years. I mean, you're just, all of a sudden you're going to get an attitude by these employees, why should I do my job every day? Because obviously the cabinet doesn't see my value as much as they do hiring somebody in these other, I think it's called locale pay, that you're giving these people. And so with that, Mr. Secretary, I'm taking you up on your invitation for criticism of this program, and you have to find a way to get people's pay up. If someone comes in to a juvenile detention center facility as a new employee, regardless of what area of the state in, it should be the same. And as time goes on, those pays should remain equal to the people they hired in with, and never should somebody new being hired in doing the exact same job, or maybe even a lower level job, be making more than somebody that's been there a while. And that is a problem that has to be addressed. It has to, we could begin to talk about pay equality with what the approach you're taking, and it's pay equality to people who's been there, that's good, dedicated state employees, that we have to take care of them as well. And I'm going to be working towards this, and I hope you will be willing to work with me towards finding this equality, to where not only you have the amount of pay to offer to new hires, but we have our current employees up in that well-paid range as well.
And I'm certainly willing to work with you, and I know Commissioner Reed is as well. And I appreciate the criticism that I invited. I think you make good points. I want to be clear, the pay differential is based either on shift or locality. We're not hiring new people into a facility and paying them more than someone else who is working in that facility. But I do understand the criticism. I think what we've tried to do, we have limited resources. And as I say, what we've done to fund these increases is cannibalize vacant positions that we've not been able to fill. So that's sort of a judgment game, how many of these positions can you cannibalize? And because someday we hope to fill them. And so what we've done at this point is we've tried to concentrate our shot on where it's needed the most. None of that invalidates the concerns you have. And we, I promise you, we appreciate very deeply all of the people that work in these facilities, and the facilities that we have that are properly staffed. I mean, we are thankful for those facilities, believe me, and we'll be happy to work with you to address your concerns.
You all done?
I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bratcher.
I was here in '96 and '98 when Ralph Kelly took over the DJJ, and it was, from my understanding, it was a consent decree, a court order that we had to separate juveniles from adults. And I tell you what, I've been on this judiciary most of that time since, and things have really kind of went off the rails in the last few years. And you guys are here before us again and not really providing any answers other than you don't have staff. Here's I have two questions. Number one is, do any other states do a private system that could just take over this if this continues to fail? Is there any other states that do that?
Yes, there are some states. I believe Florida is one of them in which they contract out for all the facilities that they have. But if you look at those, you'll see there's certainly a lot of problems with that too. And, you know, this isn't something right now with the staffing that's specific to DJJ. You know, private child cares are having this, you know, Methodist Home and Baptist and, you know, all these other, the congregate care facilities.
We know about the shortage. Okay?
Right.
We know
so,
that.
Yeah. So I'm sure with the private facilities, they're having just as much trouble filling as we are with state ones.
Sure. I'm just looking, we got to start thinking outside the box, I guess.
I would say, Representative, that one of the things that we've done, because I mean, we think kind of like you do, are there other states that have solved this puzzle that, because we're happy to copy. And I asked, I don't mind telling you, Chairman, who it was, Natalie Barikanoff of our staff, I think you know how good she is, to go find us some states that are doing this better so that we could copy that. And Natalie spent a lot of time doing the research, and she came back and said she couldn't find any that were in better shape than we were, but she could find a lot that were in a lot worse shape, like places like Texas
so we're the
and
top
Louisiana.
We're the top of the cream of the top.
No, sir, I didn't. I'm not trying to imply that at all. I'm just saying that we were unable to find a model out there that we could copy. And the report I got is that there are a lot of states whose juvenile justice system is in a lot of trouble.
This last question, and please don't take this. I've asked this before, and people being in the position that we're in, I get asked this a lot too, like every 2 years. Don't take this wrong, but just really answer honestly, because you know we are the voice of the people up here, and the people are quite dissatisfied right now with the DJJ system. Are you guys the right people for this job?
You know, I think you'd have to ask the governor that. I mean, I show up every day and do the best I can, and I don't claim to have all the answers, and I don't claim to make no mistakes.
How long have you been in there, Mr. Hart?
I've been in there in this job for 15 or 16 months, I think.
And Ms. Reed, you've been in the system a while.
Well, actually, I just came in as commissioner in the middle of August of 2021. But I was with DJJ back in its early years and its inceptions when Dr. Kelly was first there.
You're up for the job?
Again, I work for the governor.
So we got to get the governor in here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
That'd be productive. Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want this committee to be aware that legislative oversight and investigation is investigating these incidents. They are visiting centers. They are visiting a facility in Indiana where the detention centers are under the Department of Corrections, which is something I think we need to look at. I think all of this, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, it is failed leadership because it's a failure to keep up with the changes that have taken place over the years. I had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time in the detention center in McCracken County. Alarming, troubling, and Mr. Secretary, as you said, from the prison, it was scary what I saw and the stories that I heard and situations that have been evolving for years that have been ignored. And that's part of the downside of state government. Secretaries come and go, commissioners come and go, and there's no consistency. So you don't get to set a philosophy, you don't get to set a long-term plan because you may be gone in 4 years and you start all over again. And then the people that really know what's going on, nobody listens to them. And I think that's what's happened in this circumstance. And I think we have fallen so far behind that we're seeing major severe incidents occur now. And, you know, the governor, and Mr. Secretary, I have no doubts that you plan to work with us. I wish I felt as confident in the governor's willingness to let you work with us and not make decisions politically on covering his rear right now, because this is an issue that it's not going to be fixed by changing a couple facilities or moving some kids. There are structural, there are philosophical issues within DJJ that need to be addressed. I heard things like staff being encouraged, no discipline, no structure. These kids have it hard enough. We don't want to make it any worse on them. Again, Mr. Secretary, as you said, these are not the same kids we had 20 years ago. The programs that are set up in these facilities today were meant to change the lives of the kids that were there 20 years ago. The population that we see in there now, these programs don't work. They can't even get through the programs because there are disruptions. Every time they sit down to have a class, there's a disruption. The graduation rates are falling. The system doesn't work. It's broken. It's completely broken. And at this point, we can place blame all day long, but we've got to sit down and together, Governor, we have got to come up with a structure that is going to serve the kids that we can save and those that we can't save. We've got to put them in a place where those who are guarding them have the training and the ability to do that job, but we can't keep them all together. That just, I think we all realize that just simply isn't going to work. And DJJ has got to come up with a different philosophy on how to run these centers and how to get the most out of these centers. The young people that I saw, this concept of youth workers, with the kids that are in there right now, you can't have youth workers. You got to have prison guards. Somebody's going to get killed, no question about it. I heard stories about male and female being in a pod, being across from each other, and they would spend all night just flashing each other. My daughter was in a facility where the way we do it and got hurt, there'd be a major lawsuit. Not the first time I've said that. It's unacceptable. And Mr. Secretary, I'm not placing blame on you because you haven't been here that long. And I think this is years of just neglect in not recognizing what was going on in these centers and maybe not listening to those that are on the front lines dealing with this. Walking around and checking doors throughout the day, as you said, a young man that is mentally ill that spends 90% of his day in a cell without treatment. What century is this? We've got to do better, and my proposal and my push is going to be that we take emergency actions, and I think that's been done. It's going to create some problems. I don't think they were completely thought through, but we had to do something now, and I agree with that, and I think the things we've done will help. But at some point, when we take care of the immediate issues, we've got to back up and we've got to talk through where we are, the population that we're serving, all the programs that are there, and we've got to evaluate where we're going in the future. And we've got to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Those facilities have become the exact same thing that DJJ was created to stop.
That's right.
And we've got to get in front of it, and it's going to take a really deep dive into all these issues. And we're going to have to listen to the school districts that are appointed to teach the kids, all the support programs that go into it, separate these kids that can be saved and these that can't, these more the more serious offenders, the rape, the murder. We have to address those differently, and I'm not so sure that under DOC is not the best place for them to be, not in the same facilities as the adults, but to be able to share resources, and you have guards that are better able to guard them. Some kids, treatment, education, it's just not going to work. And for the most part, those are the kids that are in these facilities now. We simply don't detain the rest of the kids that those facilities were designed to serve. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Turner.
Senator, if I could.
I know you want to respond, but I want to try to get through the questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a practitioner of over 40 years, I've been involved with these juveniles and adults. And I hope that what I'm hearing from this discussion from this side and your side, that you're going to come back to us with some major recommendations. I mean, I'm appalled. I'm like Senator Wheeler, that we're having kids with mental problems being confined in a place with other hardcore criminals, and that's going to be a problem just in itself. And I hope that we're educating these juveniles, mandating it instead of turning a wild TV on every day for them. And I hope you come back with some recommendations. If we have to build a facility, but we can't do anything from this side, but you all come back with these recommendations. We're not the body of study out there unless we start bringing people in that'll tell us to tell you all what to do. And can I hope and depend on you all to come back sometime? We're coming back in January, that there's going to be some recommendations, the funding and all that stuff to get this problem straightened out?
Senator, I'm sure that yes, I'm sure that we will be talking. And again, I've shared with you, having these mentally ill children who should be hospitalized in a detention facility, that should not happen. But it has been happening for a long time, for many years. And yes, we need to find a solution to that.
One follow-up. It seems like that's been an ongoing thing. So what I'm saying is that I think we expect you and your agency to come back with some specific recommendations and saying it's going to keep going on for a long, long time.
And I understand that, and we will be having discussions. I do think it's important to say again that we don't go out and recruit these kids to come into our facilities. They're sent to us by detention orders. We have to take whoever they send, whether they're mentally ill, whether they're a murderer, whether they're a truant. We don't control who comes in detention, and we don't control when they get out. But we have to do as good as we can do while we have them. And the governor's plan, he's actually, a lot of the things that he is doing will address some of Senator Carroll's concerns, which I appreciate very much. There's a lot that I agree with my friend Senator Carroll. I agree. When you have kids that have this great propensity for disturbing behavior and violence, you can't do any programming unless you have a safe and secure facility. That's where it starts. So I think if we can separate these groups, as the governor is doing, the youths who don't exhibit that sort of behavior, we have a much better chance of really serving them. And we have a much better chance with the others to keep them safe. These are not going to be easy changes. Implementing these changes is going to be very, very difficult because we do have staffing issues. We have aging facilities that are not on wheels. They are where they were built 20 and 30 years ago. So we're going to have enormous challenges, but what the governor is doing, it will not fix every problem, but it will improve the system. And I'll just say this, I've worked with Governor Beshear on this. I know he feels very personally every time we have a staff member that's injured or every time we have a youth that is assaulted. And I know that he is making changes that are going to make improvements in this system. It still won't be perfect because the system, when you're taking people, whether it's adults or juveniles, who a judge has made a considered decision that person has to be separated from their families and separated from society, you're never going to have a system that doesn't have problems. And you know that, Senator. I know you've been in the courts of our Commonwealth a long time.
As a follow-up to my good friend Senator Carroll said, this body's going to hold you and the governor responsible for what you just got through saying. You better come back to us with some program that's going to change this, because he and you are responsible for that.
Senator,
we only fund it. We only bring you over here to ask you to get that done. So with that said, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nemes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's the hours late, so I'm going to be very quick. I've got 3 points I want to make. After the committee meeting that Senator Carroll and I co-sponsored or co-chair a few months ago, we sent some records requests over. Your office has responded. We don't think the response is fully adequate. Thank you for what you've sent over. We're going to be sending over a subpoena in short order. If you have any issues with that subpoena, please contact one of us, either Senator Carroll or myself, to discuss those issues, and we'll work through that. So a subpoena is coming. The second issue is I don't think we can allow the public to think from this committee's comments that we want to go back to the local level. That's one senator's thoughts. In my view, although I respect Senator Wheeler a great deal, that is not the way to go forward. That's going backward. Kids are different. We know that. There were a number of times where kids were preyed upon by adults when it was in the old system. We cannot go back. That should be off the table, and that's something that we can discuss. Senator Wheeler's brought it up, but I think he will understand how bad of a decision that would be. We know kids are different. The programming is not the same that they need, and so forth and so on. So that's point number 2. Point number 3, I'm going to try to end a little bit positive because obviously I'm very critical of the administration when I think it's appropriate. I was also very critical of the Bevin administration as well, and so I'm going to be critical, but I'm going to also commend the governor and yourself for something that you've done. But let me say this. What happened in Adair County can't just be glossed over. We have a young girl who was raped by multiple juvenile males, and I said in October, it was the most foreseeable thing in the history. I predicted something like this was going to happen, and it happened. I was very uncomfortable and unsatisfied with your response when I said, let's separate these kids. And you brought up, and to be fair to you, it was probably the first time you had thought about it, you brought up what I think was an inappropriate response, which is we can't separate them. That's hogwash. I have a prison in my district where we separate the women from the men. We've been doing it from time immemorial. We've been doing this forever. I'm glad the governor is now on the right page to do this. The catalyst to the governor's actions were this gang rape. But since then, and I'm assuming, Senator Kerry, you're talking about a lawsuit. Can't imagine that's not one coming from that. But since then, and this is where I want to end positive, the governor has taken, I think, very positive steps. There were 2 major immediate issues. We're going to get to the long-term issues later on. I'm not going to bring that up today. But the 2 immediate issues were boys were with girls. Some of them were 17, rape, murder charges. Some 13, 14-year-old girls, truant charges or whatever the lower end was. They never should have been put together, especially, and I don't care what other states do, but especially when we know we have acute staffing problems that are more acute today than they've been, and under your own testimony, and the charges that we are seeing among mostly the boys are much more severe than they've ever been. That's why it was so foreseeable. And if I was this young girl's father, and I know you're with me here, I would be very angry that what happened to my daughter didn't need to happen. It shouldn't have happened. We had pushed you guys to separate them, and it wasn't done until after that rape. Let me go back to being positive. Separating the genders is the right thing to do. It is legal. There's no question about that. And also separating by age, or most importantly by offense, is also very good. So I want to commend you for taking those very positive immediate steps. Now in January, let's get a long-term resolution to the issue. But I don't want to, I will be very critical when I need to be, but I also want to commend the steps that you've taken since that meeting, since the incident in Adair County. And I think that will be a big step forward to keeping our kids safe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll close. Excuse me, I won't close. We've got one more witness, and if you all wouldn't, you can stay there. You can step back. I want to call up Heather Bryant Spoon, who's a citizen from Adair County. She wanted to speak, and I wanted you all to be able to hear from her before we're done. Ms. Spoon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman Westerfield. Commissioner Reed, I want to apologize in advance if I interchange the terminology of these juvenile centers versus youth development. And I do wish that Senator Wheeler was back, but I think I'm going to address a few comments that have been made before the committee today as speaking as a resident from Adair County. First of all, Chairman Westerfield and the rest of the committee members, I appreciate your time. I'm going to limit myself to 5 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly. I did put some talking points in the packets that you have in front of you, so hopefully you can follow along. I want to start with, I want to put this out-of-the-box idea out to you as you're considering what the future of the Adair Youth Development Center looks like. It's the place where I call home, is Adair County. Before I present this out-of-the-box idea, though, I think it's important for you to know how I got to this chair here today. My father, Larry Russell Bryant, was elected as the next county judge executive for Adair County. I'll be serving alongside him in the next 4 years. But during his entire campaign, there was much discussion about the future of the Adair County Regional Jail. It's a 37-year-old facility. It has 51 beds, but houses anywhere between 120 to 145 inmates, half of which are classified as state inmates. The jail currently consumes about 85% of our property tax revenue that Adair County takes in, which happens to be the only source of revenue for Adair County at the moment. So any reduction in the operating expense of the county jail makes a positive impact on the county's bottom line. In the wake of the horrific incident that occurred on November the 11th, many Adair Countyans began to wonder what was going to happen to the juvenile center there. Because of my unique perspective and having talked to so many voters during the campaign, I began to wonder, along with my father, is there a way we can reallocate resources and facilities here in Adair County to create a unique scenario that will help reduce the burden of incarceration, not only for Adair County, but District 51 as a whole. In Adair County, currently, we have 3 incarceration facilities. The Adair Youth Development Center has 80 beds. And as far as occupancy goes, I didn't have time to gather the average daily rate, but as a resident of Adair County, I've heard we've only had 7 or 8 inmates in that facility at times, sometimes 25, sometimes 30. As of late, when we brought the other juveniles in from urban areas, we had many more, obviously. The Adair Regional Jail has 51 beds. Current occupancy is about 122. And we also have a Class D facility in Adair County with 30 beds, and the current occupancy is about 23. I'd like to propose today that the current juvenile center continue to be a state-owned facility housing adult state inmates from District 51. It was sadly demonstrated on the night of November the 11th that Adair County does not have the personnel needed to increase the occupancy rate of our juvenile center by bringing in juveniles from urban areas like Louisville. This large state-owned property could be better utilized for adults in our local area as opposed to bringing in more juveniles that come from potentially a very different criminal demographic, one that our local workers may not be prepared to handle. This would include things such as retrofitting the juvenile center with double bunks so that we go from an 80-bed facility to 160 for the adults, and also changing the facility to retrofit to accommodate adults versus juveniles. Another thing that would happen would that we could reduce our jail occupancy at the county level in half almost. So those state inmates at the county jail currently would be moved to this newer state facility, and then that would allow us to do some much needed maintenance on our county jail. We've set aside $500,000 in ARPA funds to try to work on plumbing and some major issues and the maintenance heavy burden of a 37-year-old building. With lower occupancy there, we're able to better and more efficiently work on those issues when we don't have it busting at the seams with inmates. We could also consider moving the state classified Class D inmates to this current juvenile center now, which could be a proposed state center. This would free up that facility as a potential juvenile center for our district juvenile inmates, keeping them close to home, as we know that having family close by is the best for our children and our teens. The 30 capacity facility would be more in line with the actual occupancy needs of the juvenile center before it began taking inmates as of late. Lastly, the Juvenile Center houses an education area along with a vocational area within its walls. We would love to see these areas be used for workforce reentry programs, for adult substance abuse programs, and to be able to offer other valuable therapy services to inmates that express the desire to reform and reenter the society. This scenario may not fit any other area in Kentucky, but just as counties all over the state are finding creative and personalized ways to generate revenue based on their niche markets in the ways of tourism and economic development, this personalized idea for Adair County jails can better utilize our resources, create a space for providing more opportunities for rehabilitation and reintegration, and at the same time reduce the burden of incarceration for multiple counties. I've spoken with State Representative-elect Amy Neighbors, and she supports this scenario for District 51. She's agreed to serve on a committee that will look further into this idea and help gather more specific data and support evidence with regards to average juvenile occupancy data and the numbers of prisoners that are currently being transported from Metcalfe, Monroe, and Cumberland counties. Those 3 counties do not have jails of their own, so they're having to be transported, and they're paying other counties to house their state inmates. With that, I'll close up. I know time is of the essence. I will take questions if you have any.
I don't see any questions. Ms. Spoon, I appreciate it. When you sent that to me, I wanted the committee members to hear that, and I wanted the secretary to hear that as they consider how they shuffle facilities and how they think about where to go from here.
Yes.
So I don't think we should discount any idea on spec necessarily. Certainly not the ones that you've proposed. So I appreciate you making the trip, and thank you for being patient.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I know I also want to recognize Senator Wise, who's been with us for the entire committee meeting today, who represents Adair County. He's been very active on this issue and been a concern for him. He reached out to me as well. I wanted to make sure he was recognized. Do you want to say anything, Senator? All right. One last thing here on the subject matter. We had a judge that was here earlier today. Is she still here? Judge Moore, where are you? There. Hi. Thank you. She wanted to speak, but in the interest of time, I let her know that we're gonna forego that because I was concerned we may not have time. But she did have remarks there in your folders, or they've been distributed since then. So, or they're about to be. Excuse me. We do have that. We'll get that sent to each member. Thank you, Judge, for being here and for your patience. I appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, I hope that you all will take to heart. I really appreciate Representative Nemes's comments there at the end. I don't think we should go backwards. I love the idea of separating by offense and focusing the resources and the programming for children because they are different and they need to be treated differently than adults. I don't think status offenders should be in facilities at all. I tried getting that accomplished with Senate Bill 200 a decade ago or 9 years ago, and we couldn't get it done. I don't know what Adair County's population looked like on November 11th, but to hear that you've got 150 in this group and another 100 and some odd in another group, and a good chunk of those are status offense kids, they have no business being in a detention facility. They need services. All of these kids need services wrapped around them and their families, and there need to be accountability, and there needs to be help and response. Status offense kids don't belong there. And I hope that we can accomplish that. I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for everyone for being patient here as we go. I wish you all a Merry Christmas.